Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to 3 tips and tricks how to get the most out of your fly-by-wire A380. Do note that this video is based on the version 0.12.2 that is current at the time I'm recording this one, and future versions might overrule this and make some of the tips and tricks in here unnecessary. For sure, I hope that fly-by-wire is actively working on making this video obsolete. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with the first one in the line, and that's going to be the onboard information terminal. Many of you know that the OIT is currently not simulated, right? Wrong. A mod has popped up on flightsim.to that adds the onboard information terminal to the fly-by-wire A380. You will find it linked in the video description below, and you can see it on screen right over here. Now, how exactly is this mod going to work? Well, it creates a copy of the electronic flight bag and displays it down here on the OIT. Fly-by-wire did initially not do this themselves because it kind of distorts the screen a little bit. If you compare it, the EFB software has of course been written for the screen size of the iPad, but personally, even though it is a little bit distorted, first of all, I don't really notice it too much down here, and secondly, I just find it great to have these abilities down here to show, for example, your taxi charts right in front of you compared to having them all the way to the side, or to show your SID chart when you really need it. If we have a look at the main panel as we can see it over here, I do think this is a lot more helpful than having to look over here to see the EFB all the time, and overall it's more realistic as well. Okay, for the second one we gotta take the aircraft into the air, so let's go ahead and release the brakes, and we are going to do a takeoff. And then we will look into the second option. Let's already take a little bit away over here. The second point in this video is going to be the rate of climb of the aircraft. You guys know that at the time of this recording and at the time of the publishing of the fly-by-wire A380, the aircraft is hugely overpowered. Even at weights around 500 tons as we are right now, it would easily give you 4,000 to 5,000 feet a minute rate of climb, which is quite a bit too much. Now, we can, however, do something against this, and what you will notice is that the aircraft does not really abide the thrust limit that it sets itself over here on the ECAM. So if we take a close look, you will notice that right now we are meant to have 82.2% thrust, but we have 94.3. Now, it does seem like the N1 mimics the flax value up here, so that seems to be how it's programmed at the moment. But what we can do is we can manually reduce our thrust in order to match the target N1, or rather in order to match the target thrust. And if we do that, what we achieve is a thrust reduction, which in turn results in a much more realistic rate of climb. Obviously, this is an interim solution for the time until fly-by-wire has officially fixed your engine thrust, but I do believe it is quite a useful one, as it gives you a much more realistic rate of climb. So I have just retracted the flaps, which we need to do in order for this to work. Now let's just go on a present heading over here, activate the autopilot, and see what we are going to achieve. Now by default, as you can see, we are supposed to have a climb thrust of 82.3, we have 93.1, which is around 10% more thrust than we are supposed to have. Now, if we look at this, we are at 500 tons gross weight, the aircraft climbs at 4,000 feet a minute, which is quite a lot. But let's see what's going to happen if we reduce our thrust manually. So I'm moving my thrust levers out of the climb notch, and I'm setting my thrust manually to match the climb thrust that's indicated at the top of the ECAM, so around about 83% thrust. Let's do this, wait until the aircraft has stabilized in the climb, and now we are going to have a look at what kind of rate of climb we're going to get. And as you can see, we end up somewhere, well, we got a percent thrust too much at the moment, but we end up somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000 feet a minute, which is a much more realistic rate of climb if you compare your fly-by-wire A380's performance with the performance of the A380s you can monitor on Flight Radar 24. Now, this is of course only an interim solution. You will have to leave a climb blinking up here, but overall I do think this is one solution that's not too difficult and doesn't require too much of fiddling with the aircraft in order to achieve a more realistic result for your flying experience. Now, let's go ahead and forward to point number 3, and this is the aircraft's performance. Now, this concerns both your speed and your altitude, so if you will, it's actually 2 points in one. Now, let's first of all talk about the aircraft's speed. If you look down here, you will notice that at the time of this recording and publishing of this video, Fly-by-Wire did not include any cost index simulation in the aircraft yet. You can see I have cost index 50 in here, which gives us an econ climb speed of 290 knots and Mach 0.8 on conversion, but if I change this, for example, to cost index 100, there is no change at all. In other words, there is no cost index simulation behind this at the time of this recording. Now, we can override this manually and just go to selected speed for our climbs, which not only helps us getting a more realistic rate of climb, but also helps us to achieve the sim brief targets such as timing and fuel consumption a little bit more closely. So, how quickly exactly should we fly then? That's of course the big question we gotta ask ourselves, and one source of data that we can use for this is actually SimBrief itself. You will notice that on the flight planning pages, SimBrief has some climb and descent profiles. Let's go ahead and have a look at it. So here's SimBrief with my current planned flight from Heathrow to Johannesburg. And if we go to Edit Flight up here, you will notice that we have a climb profile of 250 knots, converting onto 320 indicated and then Mach 0.84. Now let's go ahead and fly that and see what kind of results we are going to get from the aircraft. Let's go selected speed 320 and then 0.84 on the conversion. If we do this manually, you will once again notice that the aircraft is going to develop a much more realistic pitch and a much more realistic rate of climb. Of course, keep a little eye on your thrust as well here, match it occasionally so that your engine thrust output stays somewhere close to the calculated target. Alright, achieving 320 knots and establishing our climb. Now look at this, the aircraft gives us a pitch that's below 7 degrees, so it's fine to release our passengers, and a rate of climb somewhere around 3,000 feet a minute, which is a lot better than what we would have gotten otherwise with over 4,000 and a pitch around 10 degrees if you just kept the thrust in climb thrust and if you just kept the speed down at the managed target. Now, the last point I want to mention over here is our altitudes. So, the fly-by-wire calculates optimum and maximum altitudes, which are rather high at the time. Now, you can see over here it wants us to climb to an initial flight level of 370 for a 10.5 hour flight at a gross weight of 500 tons. Now that is quite high. You will notice, however, that your SimBrief flight plan gives you a lot more realistic altitudes. So if you go to SimBrief over here, you can see it initially wants us to climb to flight level 350, and then after 4 hours in flight it wants us to go to flight level 370. Now, in order to check which of the two is more realistic, we can go to one of my favorite flight simulator websites, which is Edigla. That's Echo Delta India minus Golf Lima Alpha.co.uk. And over here, you have a free registration, it doesn't cost you anything, and you have a database of real-world flight plans that have been added by volunteers. If you just go to the search function here and search for Heathrow to Johannesburg, then we can take that first flight over here from the 3rd November, and you can see that this is on the A380 on our route, so the weight is going to be somewhat in the same region. Actually, you can see it down here. Takeoff weight 506 tons, so just 6 tons more than what we had. And if we now look into the route string, initial flight level 310, okay, that's probably for political reasons, but over here, over France, at Rocan, they climb flight level 350. And then only a long time later, the aircraft is going to climb to flight level 370, and finally as the last level, flight level 390. Compared to that, if you follow the fly-by-wire standards, the aircraft is going to get you up to a lot higher flight level a lot earlier, which again adds to the incorrect fuel consumption you see on the fly-by-wire aircraft at the time being. So if you fly these profiles, if you fly the realistic speeds, and if you fly the realistic flight levels, then you get a lot more precise fuel usage of the aircraft as well. Generally, we are talking about a profile of around performance factor -5 to performance factor -3, depending on the length of the flight. It still seems to save a bit fuel on the climb and then use a bit more during cruise, but at around -5 fuel factor and Mach 0.85 in the cruise, this adds up really well. Now last but not least, let's quickly talk about the speed that an A380 flies in cruise. The standard fly-by-wire profile gets you to somewhere around Mach 0.82, which is much too slow for the Airbus A380. So once again, in order to achieve a more realistic and more accurate performance, let's have a look at Ediglar once again and have a look at a couple of real-world flight plans. If you go on the search, we can just add A388 as aircraft, and I want a departure out of the USA because we need to fly oceanic in order to get the Mach number shown in the flight plan. Luckily, there are a lot of very current flight plans available over here, all from November. So let's go ahead and have a look at some of them. We are going to start with the Emirates 5 Victor over there, then we've got a Speedbird, a Lufthansa, an Etihad and a Qantas. So that's 5 example flight plans. Let's start with the Emirates. So from New York to Dubai, this Emirates flight flew Mach 0.85 in the cruise, which you can see a little bit later in the flight plan as well. So Mach 0.85 for the Emirates. Moving on to the British Airways over the North Atlantic. They're flying initially Mach 0.84 and later even Mach 0.86. So British Airways seems to have a lot of money as they are flying really fast. If we move on to Lufthansa, then we can see that Lufthansa has been cruising at Mach 0.84. And if we are moving on to Etihad, they are also crossing the Atlantic at Mach 0.84. And last but not least, if we move on to Qantas, we can also see Mach 0.84, occasionally 0.83, but mostly 0.84 in the flight plan over here. So realistic cruising speeds around Mach 84, Mach 85. Of course, you gotta ensure that you select the same thing in SimBrief. So if we bring our SimBrief plan up one more time over here, then in order to get a realistic fuel consumption for these profiles, be sure that you select your cruise profile accordingly for the time being. So don't just go for the cost index, but much rather, if you click on the cost index, then you can change it to, for example, Mach 0.84, Mach 0.85, and profiles like these. For the descent speeds later on, we've got 0.85 converting to 300 knots indicated, and that gives you a much more realistic descent profile as well. So I hope that you like these tips and tricks. For my personal part here, I did start to record a couple of flights using these tricks and profiles, and indeed the aircraft performs much more closely to the expected numbers. With all of that out of the way, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching. If you have experience with how to fly your fly-by-wire A380 a little bit more realistic, be sure to put it down in the comments below, as I'm really looking forward to all the tips and tricks that you may have developed. In any case, I would like to thank you very much for flying along. I hope you are going to enjoy your A380 flights, and I'm really looking forward to see you all again on the next one. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much, and see you all again on the next one.